Okay, hi everyone. Makes me so happy to see all your faces after emailing you incessantly for weeks on end. Okay, I'm going to start out with a land acknowledgement for University of Washington, Tacoma, which is where you all are located right now. You can not read the land acknowledgement. Now you can read the land acknowledgement, but I'm also going to read it because it's nice to take a moment to really think about those words. So we recognize that all of us at UW-Tacoma learn, live, and work on or near the ancestral homeland of the Coast Salish people. In particular, our campus is situated on the current and traditional land of the Puyallup. And we also want to acknowledge the lands of the Muckleshoot, Nisqually, Suquamish, Duwamish, and all other traditional lands we may reside on. As people on these occupied territories, we acknowledge the land, the ancestors who have cared for this land since time immemorial, and all of our Native and Indigenous connections today. We also acknowledge the histories of dispossession and forced removal that have allowed for the growth and survival of this nation and institution. In light of this history, we have a responsibility to take active efforts to partner with our Native and Indigenous community members and neighbors to seek justice as we continue our work together as a community of learners, leaders, and educators. It's nice to just take a moment. We are indeed a community of learners, leaders, and educators. And with that, I would like to invite our first team, Team C1, to the stage. Can you pull it up for me? And once we've got their presentation loaded up, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our fearless timekeeper, Joe Lawless. And Joe, hit it.
Thank you and welcome to the final round. You will have 15 minutes for your presentation and 10 minutes to answer questions from the judges. I'm Joe and I'm your timekeeper, and I will raise a placard when there are 5, 2, and 1 minutes remaining. I will also display the timer countdown on my iPad if it doesn't go to sleep. She said fearless, that is my fear. For you to view throughout your presentation. If your team is not finished with their presentation when the timer runs out, I will speak up and you must stop the presentation. If the team finishes before the 15 minutes are over, we will proceed directly to the 10-minute question and answer period. No extra time will be allotted for Q&A. Team 1, go ahead and start your presentation.
Hi, my name's Laura Guessman.
I'm Zachary Fisher.
I'm Andy Seebeck. And I'm Jack Mills.
We are the Yellow Leaf Fund. Our main objective is to evaluate potential investment opportunities within the airline industry that align with the Yellow Leaf Fund's values. These entail meeting the triple bottom line, which include profit, people, and the planet. In addition to this, we also place specific emphasis on ESG values. My team and I have identified 4 key issues that we believe to be currently plaguing the airline industry. These are greenhouse gas emissions, fuel consumption and noise pollution, in-flight waste, and the COVID-19 pandemic. We believe that any good airline should be addressing these. In addition to these key issues, we have also identified 4 direct solutions which have quantifiable, tangible impact. We have made the ultimate decision to invest in Qantas, Australia's most successful, reliable, and sustainable airline. We will be taking you through the full scope of our investment decision, beginning with an analysis of the industry, continuing on to an overview of the company as a whole. We will then provide market analysis before concluding and opening the floor up to questions. Before getting into Qantas, however, our team has established strict investment criteria that we have used to guide our investment decision. These assessment factors can be grouped into 3 main categories. These are industry, CSR, and the market. In addition to these 3 main categories, we have also established ESG initiative guidelines. These guidelines essentially function as investment signals, and they will appear sporadically throughout the presentation to indicate when a certain criteria has been met. Taking a look at the industry, it is evident that pollution has taken a full frontal position of controversy, particularly in the last several years. As you can see in the graph behind me, the airline industry is one of the leading carbon emitters, with around 3% of all carbon emissions. However, there have recently been magnanimous efforts in sustainability innovation. In fact, many airlines are committing to reducing their emissions to net zero by the year 2050. However, what is net zero? Net zero, or carbon neutrality, essentially means that the amount of carbon emissions being released into the atmosphere is directly equivalent to the amount being taken out. This can be accomplished utilizing carbon capture technologies and a significant decrease in emissions. Many airlines are accomplishing this through the use of sustainable aviation fuels and implementing this into the fuel mix of their airlines. In fact, around 38 countries have adopted sustainable aviation fuel policies. It is not just within sustainability that the airline industry is succeeding, however. They have also successfully contended with the COVID-19 pandemic. After a steep decrease in revenue over the last several years, the airline industry is finally back and finally profitable. Around 4 billion people are expected to travel in the year 2024, and the actual desire to travel has nearly doubled since before the pandemic. With all this in mind, it is clear that Qantas is in the right place and the right time to make moves within the industry. However, what is so special about this company?
Well, we're investing in more than just a commercial airline. After 100 years of service, Qantas has obtained many different subsidiaries, including various airlines and loyalty programs. But the management teams that we partner with are equally as important as the companies in which we invest. Richard Goyder and Alan Joyce have led the charge in bringing Qantas back to normal operations since 2020. Despite financial hardship, they've been able to keep sustainability towards the forefront of their priorities with the help of government assistance. It is no secret that government policy will have a massive impact on how sustainability efforts actually pan out. But as Australia's flagship airline, we are confident that Qantas will see massive tax and cost benefits to help them pursue their goals of net zero by 2050. Qantas is also mindful of international policy. With the rise in international demand increasing, airlines are forced to somehow meet this demand while also mitigating the emissions produced. The Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation helps with this. This is also known as CORSIA, and this is a scheme to reduce these emissions on the international flights by requiring airlines to report emissions as well as pursue offsetting projects on such flights. The plan consists of 3 phases, and despite members not being required to join until 2027, Qantas and the Australian government have taken the initiative in joining in the pilot phase, subjecting Qantas to the guidelines immediately. In order to meet these guidelines and pursue their goals of net zero emissions, Qantas has created a 3-pillar climate action plan. Now, climate action plans are something that airlines have been making all over the world, but what separates Qantas apart from the other airlines is they are also setting interim targets. Such targets include reducing 25% of their carbon emissions by 2030. The first part of this plan includes operational and fleet efficiency. Qantas aims to increase fuel efficiency by an average of 1.5% per year until 2030. And they are doing this through Project Sunrise and Project Winton. Project Sunrise aims to renew Qantas's wide-body fleet, which is mainly used for international aviation. Qantas has ordered 12 Airbus A350s, and these planes will be used on routes from Sydney to New York and Sydney to London. The routes will be carbon neutral from day one because of the plane's fuel-efficient engines, the simplicity of the flight path, and the carbon offsetting projects that come with them. On the other hand, Project Winton aims to renew Qantas's domestic fleet. They've conducted a massive order of 40 next-generation aircraft, including Airbus's A321 XLR and Airbus's A220. Both planes will be replacing the outgoing retiring fleet, and they are much more fuel efficient and reduce noise levels greatly compared to the outgoing planes. The first of these are scheduled to arrive this year, meaning Project Winton will have a near immediate impact. The second part of the climate action plan entails sustainable aviation fuels. Another interim target that they have set is utilizing 10% of sustainable aviation fuels in their fuel mix by 2030, with an overall goal of 60% by 2050. And they are doing this through the ASAF partnership and offshore SAF deals in London and California. The ASAF partnership, also known as the Australian Sustainable Aviation Fuel Partnership, is a joint commitment between Airbus and Qantas of $200 million towards establishing a SAF industry in Australia. With the increasing demand of SAF needed to fulfill net zero goals, Qantas is going to need a reliable, consistent source of SAF in Australia. In the meantime, they've resorted to offshore deals in London, and in 2025, they will have deliveries in Los Angeles and San Francisco, California. This shows that Qantas truly is putting their money where their mouth is and investing in projects that aren't just good for the company, but are good for the planet. The last part of the Climate Action Plan is carbon offsets, in which they hope to invest in high-quality, high-integrity carbon removal and avoidance projects. They are doing this through their Fly Carbon Neutral initiative and matching customer contributions. When a customer is purchasing a flight out of Australia, they're presented with this screen. This gives them the option to offset the emissions produced on that very flight based on a per-person average. If Qantas customers are frequent flyer members, Qantas will give them 10 Qantas points for every dollar they contribute. In addition, Qantas matches dollar for dollar every contribution that a customer gives, essentially doubling the investment into carbon neutral projects. But Qantas isn't just stopping at the Climate Action Plan.
That's right, Zach. Qantas is doing more than carbon offsetting initiatives to help out our environment. Qantas has pledged to have zero general waste by the year 2030. In order to do this, they have set forth a multitude of steps, the first of which is a pledge to eliminate all single-use plastics by the year 2027. Single-use plastics will be replaced with sustainably sourced wooden utensils. In 2019, Qantas made a pledge to remove 100 million single-use plastics from business operations. In 2022, they shattered that goal by 7 million, removing 107 million single-use plastics from their operations. This speaks to our key tenet of ESG investment: actions speak louder than words, showing that Qantas is making promises and has the actions to back them up. Qantas is also making strides to further their socio-cultural impact. They are doing this through employing the indigenous people of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islands in carbon offsetting initiatives. In these carbon offsetting projects, the people will plant native vegetation on their land in order to promote wildlife biodiversity, economic prosperity, and remove carbon from the atmosphere. Qantas continues to lead in various other areas as well. If you take a look at the map, it shows repatriation flights that Qantas piloted during COVID-19 to reunite families all around the world during an unprecedented time in human history. Forbes magazine named Qantas the safest airline in the world in 2023. However, this is nothing new to Qantas, as they won this award in 2019, 2020, and 2021 as well. Qantas is also investing $650 million into information technology, which improves and optimizes the customer experience, as well as investing $300 million into employee compensation and benefits, showing that not only does Qantas care about their customers, but they care about those who they employ. For these reasons, Qantas meets our ESG CSR investment criteria with an overall grade of a B+. It's important to note that no airline has yet to reach an A grading, as that would represent complete carbon neutrality, and many of Qantas's peers fall in the C, D, or F grade range. Speaking of Qantas's peers, it's important to see how they match up in the aviation industry as a whole. In order to do this, we must first take a look at Qantas's financials, starting with their 3-year recovery plan from COVID-19, which is a direct solution to a key issue that we noted within the aviation industry. Qantas will have completed all of their goals set forth by the end of 2023. When evaluating a company, we use fundamental metrics and industry key performance indicators. Fundamental metrics include revenue, cash flow, and stock performance. And we use these 4 key performance indicators due to the unique nature of the airline industry. Starting with the first fundamental metric, revenue, financial analysts predict a massive increase in revenue in 2023, with another increase in 2024. However, this just paints half the picture, as operating cash flow has made a major recovery with recent increases in air travel. Qantas is able to use this money to fund ESG projects such as those outlined in their 3-pillar climate action plan, all while providing a return on that invested capital. Qantas also prioritizes shareholder return, which is proven through the $400 million buyback that they announced in August. This buyback also shows management's confidence in the future of Qantas as a company. Meanwhile, their stock has remained resilient and has steadily and consistently increased in value since their dip due to the COVID-19 pandemic, showing very low volatility. With all of this in mind, it's important to see how Qantas stacks up against their peers in the Australian airline market. That's absolutely correct. Qantas absolutely dominates the Australian airline market. Making up over 60% of the market share, when mapped onto a BCG growth share matrix, Qantas sits comfortably as a cash cow or a superstar. The reason why it's difficult to discern as to which category Qantas falls in is because the airline industry is in an important inflection point at the moment, wherein it is difficult to discern between growth as a result of COVID-19 recovery and as a result of expansion of the industry. To better compare Qantas with industry peers that sit at the top of their respective markets, we decided to measure Qantas via KPIs
ASK, which is available seat kilometers. It's a measure of supply or capacity. We also decided to use revenue and cost per ASK, which are opposite sides of the same coin, efficiency. This scales revenue and inflow and outflows to the production of the company. Finally, we decided to use load factor, and also known as capacity utilization. This is the ratio of demand measured in revenue passenger kilometers and output, which is available seat kilometers. With this in mind, comparing Qantas with these relevant peers, we see that Qantas is a comfortable firm that is healthy and well-rounded. Unlike Cathay Pacific, Qantas's CASK is measured in cents, not dollars. And although Qantas's load factor is significantly less than that of Air Asia has 1/10 of the output of Qantas. Now, what is the impact of all of this? Calling back to the guidelines set forth earlier in this presentation, we see that Qantas checks off all of the boxes. Understanding that some investors may still be hesitant in Qantas, we have identified sustainable aviation fuels to be the highest risk area because SAF fuels are a small and volatile market within Australia right now, and because they are critical for the environmental goals for Qantas. To mitigate this risk, Qantas has decided to partner up with not just users, but suppliers of SAF fuels. This shelters the market from unnecessary volatility. Now, we expect a return on investment of between 7.15% and 31.2%. And beyond just our own benefit, we expect a reduction in the mortality cost of carbon of 706 lives each year. We also expect a reduction in the social cost of carbon of $577 million. I repeat, $577 million US dollars every year. Thank you very much. We open up the floor to the judges.
Okay, judges, you now have 10 minutes for questions.
You seem to take at face value that SAF can work and can get up to volume. What risk do you see, and whether that will happen or not?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Sure. You seem to take as an assumption in your conclusions that SAF is going to come through at high volume and there are no restrictions to it. Can you give us a view of what the risk analysis would suggest and whether that actually will happen, what the major factors are that might cause it not to happen?
Oh, yes. So because the SAF market is really small in Australia right now, and because it's super important for Qantas's goals, we recognize that SAF fuel is a high-risk area. To mitigate this risk, Qantas is partnering with suppliers of SAF fuels and with users of SAF fuels to make sure that the market doesn't go under. Zach, would you like to speak a little bit about the partnerships with the suppliers and users?
I'd love to. Thank you very much for your question. So as mentioned before, Qantas is taking part in a partnership with Airbus in order to get the sustainable aviation fuel industry off its feet. Now, sustainable aviation fuels come from feedstock and reused cooking oils. Essentially, it is a source of fuel that will release less carbon dioxide emissions. Now, with this $200 million investment that Qantas and Airbus are making, they'll be investing in locally developed and produced SAF feedstock initiatives, as well as making sure the guidelines are met that the projects must be commercially viable and meet a strict set of criteria around environmental sustainability. So while we recognize that the sustainable aviation fuel industry is, as Andy stated, a very high risk, we think that Airbus and Qantas are taking the correct steps in mitigating that risk by making this investment, and Qantas has outlined other mitigations in their risk and mitigation analysis.
This is working. Thank you for the explanation. I was just looking at, I mean, there is a lot of capital, like you're talking about, with the new planes, the investment they're making in SAF, and then I think you referenced that they are, at least in the future, looking to make a return on the invested capital. Can you talk a little bit about that? And just you also expected their revenues to go up. So is a lot of that passing through to the customers, and there's concern there as far as increasing costs? But just a little more on that aspect of it would be good.
Thank you for the question. So for the return on invested capital, this comes straight from Qantas's 2022 financial report. And If you look at Pillar 3, it outlines that they prioritize projects that both exceed ESG and return on invested capital targets. So through that return on invested capital, when they purchase these more fuel-efficient aircrafts, due to the increasing price of fuel, it will only lessen their fuel costs, which will return back to the customers, as that will kind of hedge the cost of funding these new planes. And over time, that return will be greater than the initial investment in the planes. And when it comes to how they have this money, if you look at in Pillar 1, their debt targets, they actually set a debt target of 4.2 to 5.2 billion, and they're comfortably under that debt target at 3.94, showing that they do have the money to fund these projects that they put forth.
I'll probably get this ratio wrong, but I think I read in the case that at least presently the ratio in cost of SAF to traditional fuel is about 4 to 1. So what impact, if any, do you think that has on the elasticity of demand on the customer side? I mean, suppose we go to a significant utilization of SAF. Do you think that depresses customer demand to any significant degree, and would it affect your analysis?
That is a great question, and thank you very much for asking it. So, as also labeled in the case, the matters of sustainable aviation fuels are going to be heavily affected by government policy. Thankfully, with investing in an Australian-based company, the Australian government tends to lean more liberally when investing in projects such as these, and Qantas and the Australian government both want to try to reduce their carbon footprint. In light of this, we expect to see certain cost benefits as well as direct benefits in the SAF industry. And Australia has also mentioned in their own annual report that they will be helping invest in alternative fuels for certain transportation agencies and industries.
And building off what Zach said, if you go toward the appendix and go to the graph put out by McKinsey showing consumer value toward more green and carbon neutral initiatives, it shows that especially the younger generation highly values flying with a more carbon neutral kind of flight paths and really prioritizing that when it comes to planning flights.
Well, let me ask a follow-up about that, because the example was $2.89 for an international flight. What do you think would happen if that number was $29 or $290? What do you think that would do?
Another great question. Thank you very much. Back to that figure. So this picture is actually from a flight from Brisbane to, I believe, Sydney, which is a domestic flight, so not very much. Despite this low number, the matter of the fact is that customers have the option to invest in this, and as Jack stated before, customers are starting to become more involved in the sustainability practices of airlines. They are not required to invest in it, and regardless of if customers do choose to, Qantas is still taking the steps to invest in carbon offsetting and neutralizing projects. This is just putting it in the customer's face and saying, hey, we are serious about this, and we're giving you the opportunity to join in. Thank you.
Well, if that is all the questions, let's have a round of applause for our team.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to introduce Team D4.
Welcome to the final round. You will have 15 minutes for your presentation and 10 minutes to answer questions from the judges. There is no feedback session for the final round. I am your timekeeper, and I will raise a placard when there are 5, 2, and 1 minutes remaining. I also have a handy-dandy iPad timing display here for you. If your team is not finished with their presentation when the timer runs out, I will speak up and you must stop the presentation. If the team finishes before the 15 minutes are over, we will proceed directly to the 10-minute question and answer period. No extra time will be allotted for Q&A. You may proceed.
The quickest way to become a millionaire in the airline industry is by beginning as a billionaire. Richard Branson's now famous quote holds some truth and begs the important question: should you put your money into the airline industry? Good afternoon. We are Pure Planet Consulting. I'm Patrick Faust, your marketing and analytics specialist.
I'm Chloe Green. I'm your sustainability specialist.
I'm Michael Carvajal, your strategy specialist.
And I'm Giorgio Opinion, your financial specialist.
Today's meeting will begin with a fundamental analysis of the airline industry with a focus on passenger aviation. From there, and with your needs in mind as both environmental and financial stakeholders, we will lead into our 4C criteria. This has been developed by us to make sure that airlines meet the 4 criteria to be considered our ideal airline. These are
C1, competent organizational structure.
C2, capacity to maintain competitive margins.
C3, crafting a strong value proposition.
C4 contributes to a long-term and transparent sustainable value.
From there, we will show you why Delta was chosen as our ideal airline. However, after a substantial analysis, we will show you that we do not believe you should invest in Delta. You can see yourself as both a financial and environmental stakeholder. And the reality is that not just Delta, but the entire industry itself cannot support sustainable and financial stakeholders. Therefore, we do not believe you should invest, and instead should put your money in other investments.
If we had to describe our industry overview in one short phrase, it's tough. The number of players in this industry has shrunk to nearly half that amount that there were 30 years ago, mainly due to mergers and acquisitions from high competition. Also, COVID hasn't helped. The industry got hit really hard in 2020 and isn't expected to return to profitability until 2023. Lastly, it's a highly volatile industry. Its dependence on passenger demand and fuel prices mean that revenues can vary wildly from year to year. Companies in this industry need to focus on developing resilience to market turmoil and controlling what they can by promoting internal stability. The average industry employee turnover rate in the airline industry is 18%, and it costs 6 to 9 months of an employee's salary to replace them. That means that this is essential for companies to focus on securing. This brings us to our C1 criteria. We want our ideal airline to have a competent organizational structure and competitive employee-focused strategy to satisfy the needs of both shareholders and employees alike. Specifically, we want them to reach as many revenue streams as possible through a diverse air fleet and wide service coverage, and to maximize their company stability by supporting employees from the lowest level up.
The main financial problem in the industry are low margins. According to McKinsey, before 2015, the industry never reached an ROIC greater than its cost of capital. So, what are the ways to improve margins? First, an ideal optimal airline should maintain higher levels of fixed costs and lower levels of variable costs in order to increase margins with increases in revenues. In addition, it should wisely utilize its assets in order to generate the important residual finances to cover its volatile fuel costs after covering its expensive maintenance costs. How to quantify those characteristics? We decided that the optimal airline should have an operating leverage of around 15 to 20% and a capital intensity of below 1.4. Those metrics are currently observed among the most experienced and optimal airlines in the industry, which achieve scale in both customer acquisition and asset utilization. Those airlines will be able to achieve margins of around 1.3%, which is currently a projection for the 2027 average in the industry. With that in mind, our C2 is capacity to support and maintain competitive margins that satisfy shareholders and airplane manufacturers that strive for profitability and demand for innovation.
Customers drive airline revenues. However, one pain point in the industry is low customer loyalty. Airlines themselves spend $750 million per year on marketing expenditures, and most have great loyalty programs. However, only 49% of customers are loyal to just one airline. We can attribute much of this to high opportunity costs due to the prevalence of online data. As Michael stated, airlines will once again be profitable in 2023. However, pre-pandemic levels will not be exceeded both domestically and internationally until 2025. It's important to understand what consumers value so they can have that in mind when airlines craft their value proposition. Researchers use conjoint analysis to understand how consumers make trade-offs when presented a bundle of attributes. The most important attributes for consumers were brand reputation, price, direct flights over layovers, and sleeping comfort. However, I must stress that this depends upon customer segments. What about sustainability? Well, consumers are becoming increasingly sustainable. 40% of consumers would pay up to 2% more for carbon neutral flights, and 56% of consumers would consider switching to a more eco-friendly airline. However, I must again stress, this does depend upon segments, as Gen Z and millennials are much more sustainably oriented. Let's look at two important customer segments that the airline industry must craft a great value proposition for. The first is Business Brian. He's usually loyal to one airline and travels about 17 times per year. Though he makes up only 12% of all travelers, he's twice as profitable as leisure travelers are. Next is Sustainable Sarah, who is growing within the airline industry. She's under 30 years old and price sensitive, but she will pay more for carbon offsets. This leads us to our C3 criteria, crafting a strong value proposition, thereby satisfying the needs of customers. An ideal airline must possess this great value proposition to make favorable attitudes toward their brand and get loyal customers.
So one of the biggest criticisms of the airline industry is the amount of carbon it emits. And in the short term, airlines have implemented carbon offsets program that compensate for the amount of carbon they emit. And in the long term, which we found to be the more sustainable option, was sustainable aviation fuel, which decreases the amount of carbon emissions produced by airplanes by about 80%. This was a very positive option. However, there are two major problems associated with it. One being, it only is met for global demand by 1%. And the second problem being, it is double the prices of regular jet fuel. Thus, a lot of airlines tend to overstate what they are actually doing for sustainability, which brings us into our second point of greenwashing. So two airlines in particular, Etihad Airways and KLM France, both declared massive sustainability advancements and both faced backlash. Etihad Airways even over-declared its carbon neutrality by 70%. Thus, this brings us to our C4 criteria of in order for us to invest in a sustainable airline, it must contribute to a long-term and transparent impact that positively impacts its shareholders and the planet.
We've covered a lot of material so far. So just to reorganize before we continue, our C4 criteria for our ideal airline is as follows. C1, competent organizational structure and competitive employee-focused strategy. C2, the capacity to maintain and support high margins. C3, crafting a strong value proposition for their consumers. And to C4, contributes to a transparent and long-term sustainable impact.
So, how does this framework work together to achieve an optimal airline? First, through higher market reach and higher operating leverage, an increase in revenues in an airline can be correlated with growth in margins. Secondly, financial growth should not be compromised with sustainable focus. Thus, in order to focus on sustainability, an airline must wisely utilize its assets and achieve enough residual finances to finance its costly sustainable aviation fuel. Also, an ideal airline should be bounded by healthy internal structure and happy employees.
What you see before you is our alternatives. These are our 4 finalists for our ideal airline, where we used our 4C criteria framework to evaluate them. Green means that they are excelling in our expectations relative to other airlines within the industry. Yellow means that they meet the expectations, and red means that they fall below the expectations. Our finalists were Delta, Cathay Pacific, American Airlines, and FedEx Express. We chose FedEx Express to provide an investigation into the cargo industry to see if it would be a lucrative investment. However, as you can see on our alternative slide, the best airline that we chose was Delta.
So why Delta? Delta performed and exceeded every one of our sustainable frameworks, financial framework, and internal, external, and customer segments. Delta is constantly overperformed in sustainability in an industry that is constantly underperforming in sustainability.
Delta has expanded far beyond its modest roots in 1928, reaching 90,000 employees by 2023. These important employees help deliver 4,000 flights daily to 275 locations across 6 different continents. The company has strategic joint venture partners in order to expand its international reach and also participates in the cargo industry, delivering 2.2 billion carbon ton miles per year.
As far as their employee experience goes, Delta gets green lights. They have an 87% employee satisfaction rating and only 2% employee turnover rate. If you remember from our C1 criteria, the industry average is 18%. This means that Delta is doing everything they need to secure their rating as both passing our C1 criteria and the #1 major rated airline.
We're also very, very happy with Delta's performance on our C3 metric, crafting a strong value proposition, which we'll show you through John. Meet John. He flies 2 to 3 times per year, but he's not loyal to one particular airline. Throughout the entire buying experience, John really enjoys his experience with Delta. He books his ticket mainly due to Delta's reputation and great ticket prices compared to competitors. He also logs his Sky Miles on the Delta app and is happy because he'll get free miles or a free flight after just 4,500 miles logged. While on the flight, John has great customer service and also enjoys his on-flight amenities, making John a loyal customer that will return to Delta.
So, what is Delta currently doing for sustainability? They are currently working on replacing 10% of their fuel with sustainable aviation fuel by the year 2030. They have even signed an agreement to purchase 75 million gallons of SAF, which would decrease their overall CO2 emissions. And then the second initiative they are taking is they have purchased 1.7 million in carbon offsets and plan to purchase 137 million more. While this is all really positive, there are some drawbacks. It is small considering the amount of time that is spent over. Thus, to reiterate, by 2030, only 10% of Delta's operations will be fully sustainable.
Looking at those financials, we can clearly see that Delta is a superior company in its industry. With 1.43 capital intensity and only 23% of expenses being related to volatile fuel costs, Delta will be able to achieve a 4.12 CAGR of EBIT until 2030. In addition, its current profit margin is already 2.6, which puts it above the projected industry average by 2027. Thus, the main component we used in our financial model for Delta was its costly sustainable initiatives, particularly its 10% switch to sustainable aviation fuel. This yielded us a projected Delta share price by 2024 as $42.2, which is an 8.1% ROI over 1 year. However, this ROI is below the industry-required 9.5%, which begs the question, is Delta's DNA overall investable?
So through a sustainability sense, yes, we love what Delta is doing. However, in the greater picture of things, we still need more from this industry, and it is not enough to address an investment in this industry.
As far as financials, Delta does have some strong suits, but as Georgie said, the 8.1% ROI just doesn't cut it for the 9.56 that we're looking for.
So, how does those two facts come together? To put it simply, Delta is an amazing company. However, it's an amazing company in a consistently underperforming industry. To put it into perspective, Delta's already insignificant investment in sustainability will already yield a suboptimal ROI. To be clear, currently, Delta is committed to change only 2.3% of its expenses due to its sustainable investments. However, in order to make a real, material sustainable impact, it will have to change 23% of its cost structure, which will yield an even worse financial performance. Thus, our thesis is that Delta is not a buy, as the corporate sustainability objectives and opportunities are far disconnected from long-term and short-term financial health.
Allow me to bring you back one more time to the stakeholder iceberg that we showed you at the beginning of this meeting. You can consider yourself as both a financial and an environmental stakeholder. The bottom line is, if the financial stakeholders are bolstered by financial performance, the environmental stakeholders will be forced to sink. There is no synchrony between these two stakeholders within not only Delta, but the industry alone. Therefore, we do not recommend an investment in any industry. We instead recommend that you invest in other assets that offer superior returns and better stakeholder alignment.
Invesco Solar ETF, Vestas Wind Systems, Brumble's ARD are assets that both yield higher rate on return on investments than the entire airline industry and higher sustainable material impact than, again, the entire airline industry.
Thank you for your time. We are Pure Planet Consulting. We would love to open the floor to any questions that you may have.
All right, judges, the floor is yours, and you have 10 minutes for questions.
Let's pick up right where you left off. So if direct investment into an airline doesn't make sense, did anything of your research come out where you could invest in the airline industry?
So, as we mentioned, the airline industry as a whole is definitely not an investment if you consider yourself both an environmental and a financial stakeholder. However, we developed those three alternatives that yield both an optimal ROI, which is higher than that of the industry, and an sustainability impact, which is again higher than that the entire airline industry suggests. We are happy to work with you upon those investments further on, and we are happy to answer all of your questions about those.
I'd like to go right to the conclusion, too, because I think it's bold. And am I right in understanding that you're saying that in this particular industry, that financial success and environmental success are incompatible?
What we believe currently is that there is financial opportunity and there is sustainability initiatives but because of the nature of the airline industry, it's hard to put the two together to make an actual worthy investment. The biggest problem with this industry is that they're burning jet fuel, and that it's mandatory to fly planes. And so we looked at sustainable aviation fuel as a direct solution to that, and it's good. But where the technology is right now, it's just too expensive to incorporate fully into the industry, and therefore the sustainability objectives just aren't realistic right now.
So in part of your analysis, did you take a look at the balance sheet and determine debt levels of Delta?
So the particular financial analysis of Delta is something we can go over with you in the future steps. However, we looked at the main components of its financials, and we definitely could see that this is a company that was able to achieve a very efficient asset utilization, a very efficient revenue generation. It is definitely one of the most sustainable companies in the industry over the time in terms of financials. It can achieve great performance right now. It will achieve great performance in the future. It is very financially solvent, so it is a great company within its industry.
So if you were an airline CEO at Delta, what would be one significant change you'd make to make it a more attractive investment?
So we did find Delta to be very desirable. However, we would recommend they go down the path of really getting involved with sustainable aviation fuel. That can reduce their carbon immensely. I mean, however, the biggest problem that's facing them really is that there's just not enough and there's just not the demand. That's why we just couldn't justify an investment. However, I mean, they're doing a lot for sustainability, but we would recommend really trying to get SAF, implement carbon offset programs, and just anything they can do to become more sustainable and as a whole.
Any more questions, judges? I believe that is it. Let's have a round of applause for Team 2.
All right, folks, it is my honor, my pleasure to introduce to you Group B3. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them after Joe does what he needs to do.
So welcome to the final round. You will have 15 minutes for your presentation and 10 minutes to answer questions from the judges. There is no feedback session in the finals. I'm your timekeeper, and I will raise a placard when there are 5 minutes, 2 minutes, and 1 minute. I also have a running timer here, so you will always know how much time you have left. If your team is not finished with the presentation when the timer runs out, I will speak up and you must stop the presentation. If a team finishes before the 15 minutes are over, we will proceed directly to the 10-minute Q&A period, and no extra time will be allotted to the Q&A. So you may begin.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having us here to present to you today our investment pitch on Alaska Airlines and why we truly believe it is the best airline to fuel you for the future. Giving you an overview of our team, my name is Bailey, and I'm joined by my colleagues Cameron, Raj, and Kabir, and we are from Team B3. So the overall objective that we've determined for you today is which major international airline is the most attractive investment, not only on a sustainability front, of course, but also in terms of financial performance, and really just maximizing that triple bottom line. What we'll cover throughout this presentation is first we'll take a look at an industry overview specifically of the US-based airlines industry. Then we'll go over our decision criteria and what really guided us throughout our competitive analysis. Then we'll talk about our evaluation of Alaska Airlines, and then we'll land on our investment thesis to conclude. So like I mentioned, going over that industry overview of the US-based airlines industry specifically, what we can see here is total revenues of $208 billion, with 69% of that being directly attributed to domestic travel itself. Going into the operating conditions, as you can see here, we have 5, but we really want to hone in on that revenue volatility number 3. Because of recent events such as COVID-19 and the Russia-Ukraine conflict, this volatility has been quite high, as the airline industry itself is quite highly sensitive to economic cycles and fluctuations. This leads us into looking at industry performance drivers. What we can see here from number 1 is trip demand. Consumers really drive the revenue, of course, and they're looking to book flights. And especially with COVID-19, they're looking to fly more than ever now that we're trying to get that travel bug out of us. And additionally, when they're looking to travel, because of what we're seeing, such as high inflation rates, they're looking to travel more domestically than they are internationally. So that 69% is only going to increase in the short term here. Going over the macro impact factors of this industry, we've got the 6 listed here, but we want to focus on environmental, ethical, and political. On an environmental front, the climate crisis is growing more now than ever, and we want to make sure that airlines are doing their part to combat that, as they are quite a large producer of greenhouse gas emissions. Looking at ethical, consumers book the airlines that they do because of things like customer satisfaction, so that's something to take into consideration for the airlines as well. Thirdly, on a political front, especially here in the United States, the Biden administration has taken great steps to change the ESG standards in this industry. Firstly, by rejoining the Paris Climate Change Agreement. Secondly, by cutting greenhouse gas emissions to 50% below 2005 levels by 2030. And then third, by becoming a fully carbon zero industry by 2050. As we did our initial research throughout all the different airlines we could have chose to pitch to you today, what we noticed is that they all roughly fall into these 3 different alliances that you see here: Star Alliance, Oneworld, and SkyTeam. As we did a little bit of deeper research into these airlines, we saw that the ones that are in Oneworld are the only ones that are specifically governed by Oneworld to achieve a specific SAF strategy by 2030. So when we looked at that and then combined it with their network effect of just the airlines that are in these alliances, it just really strengthened our belief that Oneworld is quite a strong alliance just to kind of get us going and get our initial research looking into.
On to the decision criteria. When we were looking at the decision criteria, we were looking at the Morgan Stanley Capital Index as well as the Dow Jones Sustainability Index for our ESG performance. On the financial side of things, we used the S&P Capital IQ as well as Bloomberg to assess some of the financial analysis and looking at credit and analyst ratings. Moving on to the competitor analysis. We chose 20 airlines that we thought had a positive sustainability and financial return. Looking at these 20, we moving on to a kind of index looking at each of those 20 airlines. We re-evaluated and reweighed each of the E, S, and G through the Morgan Stanley Capital Index. Through this, we picked those that scored on a 6 or above and those that had the Dow Jones Sustainability Index stamp of approval. That leaves us with 5: Lufthansa, American Airlines, Alaskan Airlines, Air France-KLM, and ANA Holdings. Next, we identified any red flags we saw within the process. Starting with Lufthansa, we found out that they have an air maintenance technic group called Technic, which is valued at 3.5 billion euros. This could muddle some of the financial analysis, and we wanted to have a clear view of what their financials look like. Air France and KLM. KLM is the very first airline to have a greenwashing lawsuit filed against them. Because of customer dissatisfaction, they had lawsuits against sustainability practices that the company was facing. For ANA Holdings, they are a company who's based in Japan, who has different sustainability standards compared to the USA, and we wanted to have that same sustainability standard across the board, making ANA Holdings a bit difficult to compare to others. This leaves us with our final 2, American Airlines and Alaskan Airlines. Looking at the financial statements, you can see here across the board that Alaskan Airlines does meet a higher recommendation when you're looking at those financial performers. Alaska has a sound balance sheet as well as outpaced American in their revenue growth. Alaska appears to be on a strong underpriced and has potential high cash flows. This leads us to a recommendation of choosing Alaskan Airlines. In Alaskan Airlines, they are a Seattle, Washington-based company, and of course, they are the 5th largest US airline in the United States, and they're looking at their operating statistics from their annual 10K, which was only released to the public for the 2 weeks ago, and you can see from all of those positive 2021 changes that they are on the right track to having a huge opportunity.
And now just to touch on a discussion of a sustainability analysis for Alaska Airlines. Now, beginning by looking at the environmental lens, we can see that Alaska Airlines has a score of 6.5, higher than the industry average of 5.3 across its competitors. The reason for this is due to their operations, as they operate with 87% less carbon intensity in their operations when compared to industry peers. In terms of carbon offsets, we can see that Alaska Airlines has 3 primary focus points for this program. The first being that they have a preference for durable carbon removal and sequestration approaches that are verified in carbon accounting. This is to ensure that they do not displace or emit any emissions in other projects. The second component of their carbon offset program is that for any carbon offsets used, they ensure to work with third-party experts to source high-quality offsets with a net positive offset value. And finally, Alaska Airlines recognizes that carbon offsets should always be a last resort for any emission reductions programs. Now, you may be wondering, what is SAF and why is SAF so important? The reason SAF is important is because it is made from waste materials such as cooking oil, forestry residue, or carbon captured air. And sustainable aviation fuel actually provides an opportunity to reduce emissions in the airline aviation industry, as it is a fuel that emits less carbon by up to 60 to 80%. On the right, you can see some of the steps that Alaska Airlines has taken to achieving SAF, with the most recent being at the top and their agreement with Gevo to purchase 37 million gallons of SAF every year beginning in 2026. From this, we can observe that Alaska Airlines is leading the industry in SAF adoption and continuously reinvesting in green initiatives. From a social lens, Alaska is on par with its competitors with an industry average score of 4.4. This is in part due to some concerns with privacy and data security, as well as product safety and quality, similar to their peers. However, Alaska benefits significantly from its labor management practices. From its labor management practices, it has a limited risk of disruptions, employment litigation, or reduced activity. With their workforce diversity, we can see that Alaska has equitable hiring and promotion practices, because we can see in their workforce diversity that they have diversity across age, gender, and creed. From this, we can see that Alaska Airlines is leading the industry in SAF adoption and continuously reinvesting in green initiatives. From a governance perspective, Alaska outpaces its competitors significantly with a score of 7.1 compared to 4.2. The reason for this being their board, pay, ownership and control, and accounting practices far exceeding their competitors. In addition to this, they also have a very diverse set of management teams that have extensive experience in the airline industry, with numerous members of their board having over 10 to 15 years of experience in the industry and being promoted entirely from within Alaska Airlines. And we can also see that their board is exceptionally diverse, with over 40% of board members being Black, Indigenous, or people of color. So their sound governance practices and emphasis on gender equality truly lead the airline industry.
Alaska Airlines is truly a pure-play transportation airline, and so the business is really driven by its aircraft assets. And so when we see this table here, we can see that these assets are quite modern, quite young. From an environmental perspective, a more modern fleet is really conducive to less carbon emissions. They've had a very strong track record of innovating in terms of wingtips, in terms of lighter seats, et cetera. From a financial perspective, having a younger fleet also reduces the need for very significant expenditures in the next few years, which could really dilute earnings and cash flows. From a customer experience perspective, having a more modern plane is very much fosters a better customer experience, in addition to the exceptional customer service that Alaska Airlines is really known for. Moving ahead in the longer term, we're really glad to see that Alaska Airlines has a very strong plan with commitments in place to maintain a healthy fleet and really further these competitive advantages on these fronts. In terms of financial analysis, so to preface, we used S&P Capital IQ and we used Bloomberg to conduct analysis and inform our own views, and then compared that with the views of 13 equity research analysts who have an expert understanding of the airline industry. And we found that our views were aligned with those of these equity research analysts. And so in terms of key airline metrics, Alaska Airlines beats out all of its S&P 500 industry peers. To reiterate the key points, from a balance sheet perspective, very strong balance sheet. They've had very strong top-line growth, very competitive profitability and unit economics, and an attractive valuation based on those underlying aircraft assets and the free cash flows that they yield. The one red flag that we found was really in terms of that levered free cash flow margin, and that's something that we wanted to dig into further. And so it's really important to note that this levered free cash flow margin, the reason why it was really lagging peers is because Alaska has been leading peers in terms of fleet renewal. And so in the last few years, the expenditures on that fleet renewal, coupled with a lot of these COVID headwinds, led Alaska to really lag in terms of EBITDA and return on assets relative to peers in the last few years. It now has the youngest fleet among all of its peers. So an average age of 8.8 years that you can see there. And with this the newer, younger fleet, and a lot of these tailwinds supporting travel, particularly regional travel for Alaska Airlines, we can see here that EBITDA and return on assets are projected to increase over the next 2 years at a very healthy clip. And we feel that this will flow through to cash flows as well, noting that CapEx is set to ease in the next few years additionally. Now, from a valuation perspective, when we isolate for capital structure, when we look at leverage as well, from multiple perspectives, we feel that Alaska Airlines is underpriced relative to its peers. And the investment opportunity is priced for value with very high growth potential. And we find that very compelling when it comes to Alaska Airlines. And so to summarize our investment thesis, the key strengths of this investment. So number one, we feel that Alaska is poised to benefit from multiple long-term tailwinds, supporting trip demand, particularly regional trip demand, and oneworld's growing network effect. Second, Alaska Airlines has a very, very strong ESG profile that we've covered, including an awarded company culture and an industry-leading governance and fleet composition. And we think that this will be further benefited from oneworld's SAF leadership. Financially and operationally, they're very well positioned for optionality in a high interest rate environment. So their capital structure, as we've seen, has very little debt, and that's a huge advantage relative to its peers in the S&P 500. And it's coming at a very highly attractive valuation for the return potential that it offers. In terms of key risks, although Alaska's Flight Pass product could mitigate some of this revenue volatility, we think that it is worth kind of the risk of harming unit economics in the long term because it's enabling Alaska Airlines to gain a lot of market share in California, which is really, really important. Second, SAF leadership could be especially costly in the medium term with continued volatility in oil economics. But we think that this is a strong investment in terms of future-proofing the company. And we think that these agreements in place with GEVO and some of these other partnerships are going to enable Alaska Airlines to receive this SAF at a very competitive price with its oneworld peers that have structured the agreements in accordance with one another. In terms of another risk, very significant, undiversifiable, systematic risk does persist in the airline industry. Of course, we've seen that with COVID-19 and the Russia-Ukraine conflict. This is a given, but it is worth reiterating given the times that we're in right now, especially with the high interest rates. And unlike certain peers, lastly, Alaska is essentially a pure play passenger transportation airline. And so this does represent significant idiosyncratic risk, but we think that the risk reward proposition from Alaska from an ESG standpoint, sustainability standpoint, and also from a financial performance and return standpoint are highly compelling. And so our mandate is really based on 5 key points. Number one, a quality management team, a strong balance sheet, a healthy return and reinvestment in assets, competitive advantage, and an attractive valuation. We feel that Alaska Airlines meets all of these points, and that is why we are so excited to propose an investment into Alaska Airlines. We absolutely recommend that this is a buy. We have a very strong conviction with this recommendation, and based on our analysis, coupled with the analysis of expert analysts, we believe that this has an implied return of 32%. With this concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for your time. I'd love to open the floor to any questions that you might have.
All right, judges, the floor is yours for 10 minutes of questions.
I can try to start off. You mentioned industry-leading governance and fleet composition, and I was wanting to maybe have you put a little more content behind specifically that fleet composition. I know you put some examples of the type of aircraft and so on and so forth, but when you pair it with industry leading, can you put some kind of, what's your basis? Give us a little more color in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Flip back to that slide for you as well. So I think number one, when we did some of our research, we actually did look at some of these models of planes, and they are on the more sustainable side, but the real differentiator, what you can really see from Alaska Airlines versus its peers in terms of how is this like an industry-leading fleet, really comes down to age. So over time, it's been in the best interest of aircraft manufacturers and airlines as well to have newer planes that are more efficient. Because it's more cost efficient as well if you're using less fuel, because fuel is obviously the largest driver of cost for flights. And so when we look at the average age of these aircraft, if I could click to the right slide. When we look at the average age of these aircraft, 8.8 years, they're much more cost efficient, they're much more fuel efficient. And so that's where the industry leading comes in terms of fleet composition. They've also had very strong partnerships. So they were like a first mover in terms of innovating some of these wingtips that are more fuel efficient. In terms of seats, they have partnerships for lighter seats that are much more fuel efficient, using the same manufacturer that designs car seats for Porsche. And in terms of governance, I'll let Kabir speak to that a little bit, but the highest governance score essentially at a high level in terms of all of the companies that we looked at from an MSCI perspective. And so that's like an industry-leading kind of buy-side product with an especially high reputation for ESG. And so, the incentives that they have in place, the board and the management team, very, very strong.
When you were going through at the beginning and kind of getting to picking Alaska Airlines, you specifically focused on the One World Alliance. It was interesting that they had, as far as their own ESG standards. Can you talk a little bit about that and how are they enforcing that and kind of how does that benefit as far as Alaska versus the other alliances?
For sure. So I wasn't able to touch on that during the presentation, so thank you very much for asking about that. But the International Civil Aviation Organization, which is the one mandating and implementing SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, actually only mandates a 10% reduction in the carbon emissions from this fuel, whereas Alaska Airlines has internally mandated a 60% reduction of emissions from any SAF fuel that they are requiring to use, which also sets them apart from the competition.
So on your financial analysis, back on that page you were on a minute ago, it showed EBITDA at negative 14.6% in the red. Can you explain a little bit or behind the numbers of why they are so far behind than the competitors up there?
Yeah, absolutely. So a combination of COVID headwinds, so everyone experienced that, so that's universal against the comparison set, but the real differentiator was that Alaska has already been renewing its fleet. And so those expenditures based on kind of the financing arrangement that they have with their fleet, so their entire fleet's leased, about 80% of that is coming down to capital leasing, and then 20% of that is an operating lease. And so with the capital lease, they take the plane, that goes as like an asset, of course, on the balance sheet, and then the lease on the debt side, but then it's accounted for with very high levels of interest expenditures. And so that started earlier on for the past few years, and so that was really eating into EBITDA, but more so return on assets as well, with the interest expenses and with the depreciation expenses. And so moving forwards, to gauge kind of free cash flow potential ahead, of course these tailwinds are definitely supporting travel now, but I think that with the fleet and the position that it's in, Alaska Airlines does not have to incur these expenditures with rising interest rates on its debt. And so we do feel that these cash flows are going to be much stronger moving forwards. So as EBITDA increases and CapEx projects to ease, that's really where we're seeing the potential. And so it's lagged in the past, and we feel like this is a really strong inflection point.
I guess to add on to that, because you talked about that Alaska is leading as far as industry and SAF adoption. I think that was one of your slides. Did you see that when we talked about the previous team as far as the higher prices? Is that going to negatively affect the EBITDA over the 5-year period, and is there something that they're doing to offset that?
Yeah, I think it absolutely does, stand to potentially eat into some of those margins. And so, I think that is a risk that, we definitely see, and we touched on the risk side. But to your point, I think that, the best thing you can do to mitigate that is really, can you buy this in bulk? And so currently, production is very low. Like SAF accounts for about 1% of total, airplane fuel consumption. And so, One World is the only airline alliance that's really taking a group approach in terms of, having like a consortium of buyers. So to secure that at like a lower price. And so we think that is, the best step that you could take in terms of, preventing kind of margin erosion. And so we do see them taking that step. And I think that some of the other investments that they're making outside of One World, but independently, as Kabir kind of touched on, leading the industry just themselves in terms of SAF adoption. I think these are kind of investments that they are more privy to in terms of like earlier stage investments in SAF and technology, and so they could reap the rewards of that for a lower price versus people who are trying to get in on that later.
So you spoke about the maturing of airplane investment for the time being, which would predicate a lower capital call. In terms of their on-the-ground and other technology, are they expecting to have major outflows in those investments? And if so, what are they looking at for financing?
From our analysis, no significant investments outside of fleet. Those are going to be the most significant. And so those are really the core driver that we looked at in terms of the forecasting for cash flows moving forward, especially given their business model. Just being, pure play transportation, it's really just the assets in and assets out that would drive kind of the majority of impact. And so no other, large drivers were forecasted, but I'm sure, given the environment, there could be, changes that are unexpected. And we feel like using kind of the range of analyst estimates and some sensitivity there, really reassured us on that front.
Clearly the market is putting a lower value on Alaska than you would. As you invest, as you go forward, what would you be looking for as one global change, external environment that might impact Alaska and say we should get out? And what would be one internal change that you'd notify that would also say, here's a signal, we should be out of Alaska now?
Yeah, I think in terms of an external change, the biggest would be kind of continued volatility in oil prices. And so, leading the industry in SAF adoption is great from a sustainability perspective, but of course from a financial perspective, it can be priced much higher than your average airline fuel. And so if that's to jump past a certain threshold, that would significantly kind of eat into the return potential. And I think internally would be a change in capital structure. So that balance sheet is so strong relative to peers, and that's something that is kind of a must, I think, for our mandate and, our belief on this investment. And, if that capital structure was to change dramatically with rising interest rates, that would be a huge red flag for us.
All right, if there are no more questions, let's have a round of applause for Team 3.
We're going to go ahead and get started. This is our last finalist, and it is my privilege and honor to introduce Team A1.
All right, well, welcome to the final round. You will have 15 minutes for your presentation and 10 minutes to answer questions from the judges. I am your timekeeper, and I will raise a placard when there are 5, 2, and 1 minute remaining. However, there is a timer right here where you'll be able to see a countdown timer for your time. If your team's not finished with their presentation, when the timer runs out, I will speak up and you must stop the presentation. If the team finishes before the 15 minutes are over, we will proceed directly to the 10-minute question and answer period, and no extra time will be allotted for Q&A. Team A1, you may begin.
Great. Hello, we're A1 Consulting. Today we'll be covering an overview of the airline industry as well as a pitch for Alaska Airlines. My name is Jagger, and this is my team here, Annie, Shreya, and Cameron, and I'll leave it to Annie to kick off the industry overview.
To begin, we've done a lot of research regarding the macro trends that are happening in the airline industry. To start with the green air travel priority, there's been an increase in consumer awareness regarding green air travel, and with this, a lot of airlines are starting to shift their missions as well as understanding their global impact with their carbon emissions. Next is a decrease in travel and business travel. With that, this comes from work from home as well as because of COVID-19, and so there has been a decrease in air travel that airlines are having to face that problem. Next, we have a focus on customer experience. Airlines are understanding that the customer wants to feel valued, and they're doing this by understanding the customer during really hard times and times of frustration. This may be because of delays or lost luggage. The airline wants to be there for the customer because the customer needs it. Lastly is more green capture projects. This goes hand in hand with the green air travel priority. Airlines are expanding measures such as having more fuel-efficient aircraft.
Yes, and a few key initiatives that we hope to highlight here are that electrical aircraft projects are underway as we speak. This will reduce the need for fuel. Speaking about fuel, SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel, is fuel that is net negative carbon emissions fuel. Specifically, Alaska Airlines will plan to sign a contract so that in 2026 that they will completely adopt 185 million gallons of fuel. Additionally, there's an increase in startups and battery, and with the electrical aviation and ride-sharing abilities, this increase of electric VTOL systems, acting sort of like Uber, is increasing in the industry as well, all of which will completely reduce the need for fuel in the future. Why now? There's a need of better efficiency for all of the companies, specifically for Alaska Airlines. There's increase in private charter around the industry and the need for net zero emissions.
So Alaska Airlines is part of One World Alliance, which is one of the three airline alliances in the airline industry. And these alliances link together different airlines so that they can achieve their ESG initiatives, mitigate legal restrictions, and also create more efficient flight routes. Now we're going to go more in depth into Alaska Airlines. So why Alaska Airlines? We decided that Alaska Airlines was the best airline to invest in because they're committed to green initiatives, they invest back into the community, and they're very people-oriented, as you can tell from their high ratings from their customer satisfaction surveys. And although they're a small aircraft, still a small airline still, compared to their competitors like Delta, they're still the only major US airline to have seen an increase in passenger revenue in the last few years.
In our research and in Alaska Airlines timeline, we found that in 2016, they acquired Virgin America. Virgin America, as I previously mentioned with the eVault electricity, they have their hands on the new systems which allow for ride-sharing development. Next, they joined One World, and 8 days ago, they have new vice presidents stepping on board, spearheading the goals for the ESG initiatives, as we'll be discussing throughout the presentation.
So what sets apart Alaska Airlines from their competitors is their mission, vision, and core values. To summarize as a whole, their values all emphasize the importance of their people, community, and their environment. And these are just a few of the aspects that make Alaska Airlines a very lucrative investment. And this is all along with their corporate social responsibility initiatives. So Alaska Airlines CSR initiatives are all centered around corporate giving or investing back to the community, which they do through by helping with career connections, diversity and inclusion, environmental sustainability, and socioeconomic mobility. And one of the ways in which they have spearheaded their campaigns is with the Green Initiative, which is to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2040 through the use of Sustainable Aviation Fuel, or SAF, and more efficient routes. And these are the current trade routes that they have.
Next, we're going to move on to environmental social governance. So with environmental social governance, there are many different investing approaches you can take on. These are two that we suggest investors to take on today. The first is social responsible investing. This is more of a value-based investing approach, understanding the company that you're investing into and its values, as well as understanding that the company wants to reduce risk. Next is a mission-related investing approach. This is aligning your personal values with the company you're investing into. To speak more on ESG and Alaska Airlines and how they meet, with ESG scores, those are third-party scores that they give to companies within an industry to see how those companies are meeting ESG standards within their industry. As you can see here, Alaska Airlines is very much lower than their competitors, coming at 26.2, with their competitors being more higher risk, medium to high risk. Here, you want a lower score. The lower score, the better for the environment and social and governance. So how is Alaska Airlines meeting their goals, and how are they keeping up with that score? Well, they're setting these goals, and they're doing a new goal plan to meet these goals by 2025. Within this goal plan includes a 5-part plan, which includes fleet renewal, operational efficiency, carbon offset technology, new propulsion technology. And within that new propulsion technology, there is something interesting here with Alaska Airlines. So a lot of companies are utilizing more electric and water-based technology, which Alaska Airlines is gravitating towards this energy source, but they're also gravitating towards another new renewable energy source, which is hydrogen. If Alaska Airlines were to meet this goal, which they plan on doing, they would be the first company in the industry to use hydrogen-powered energy, being a trailblazer for others. The next is frontline representation and labor practices. What's great here is Alaska Airlines really invests into their employees. In fact, they are very supportive of their labor union, which 85% of their employees are a part of. Next is community involvement. Alaska Airlines understands that they need to get involved with their community and make an impact there. They do this by matching their employee donations to charity, as well as having company-wide volunteering days. Lastly is safety and crisis management. Alaska Airlines has crisis management criteria, as well as training for all of their employees that are up to date.
Now we'll be going into a more in-depth analysis of Alaska Airlines, looking at their ethical considerations, a SWOT analysis, and financial considerations. So for ethical considerations, for us as a consulting firm, it is our duty to our investors, our clients, to seek financial stability, promote the values of our contributors, our investors, and ensure that the businesses that we're recommending have business models that are sustainable in the long run. And that's why we think Alaska Airlines is the best investment of all the airlines, and they have values that are worth investing in.
Next, we have conducted a SWOT analysis to understand why Alaska Airlines is such a top performer and why they will continue to be one. So with their strengths, they have impactful ESG initiatives that I just spoke about, and a strong balance sheet, which we will go over. With their weaknesses, they are a smaller company, as Shreya mentioned, but with that, they are investing into their infrastructure to meet up with the standards of their competitors, and in fact, they're investing $2 billion within the next year into their infrastructure. The next is opportunities. They have a very expansive workforce and, in fact, a low turnover rate. And with their investment into their employees, this is only going to be a greater thing for them. Next is they understand their consumer awareness of issues like carbon emissions. And so they're setting their ESG goals to meet those consumer expectations and meet their own. Lastly is threats. These are threats that the entire airline industry as a whole is facing. Aviation telecommunication interference. This is due to electronics. And how Alaska Airlines is facing this is that they're combating against it by investing into their infrastructure, as I mentioned. Lastly is the less business and leisure flights. This is due to COVID-19 and work from home. How are they combating against this? Well, they're investing into their high customer satisfaction rates, which they plan to continue to maintain by having on-time business flights and the least amount of delays in the industry.
So given that we're proposing an investment into Alaska Airlines, we believe that it would be important to cover some of the accomplishments that they've had in the most recent quarter, as well as some things that they have announced moving forward. First of which to highlight, calling back to their vision statement based on their values of customers and their people, their employees received the highest bonus rate in the company's history at 10.5% on top of their normal salaries. In addition to this, they've also achieved an industry-best completion and on-time performance rate. We believe that this is incredibly important because in an industry that's run rampant with flight cancellations, it shows that Alaska Airlines truly cares about their customers and their time. And last of which, and what we believe may be the most important, is they finalized the transition of their fleet. And this allowed them to save on fuel costs, maintenance costs, and pilot training costs of over $75 million a year. And looking forward on the horizon, first of which is a headcount growth. Management announced that they will be adding 11,500 jobs between 2022 and 2023. In addition to this, we believe that they also have $2.4 billion in cash and cash equivalents. We think this is an incredible point for the company because other airlines in the industry may be purchasing other planes and therefore growing their company through debt. And given rising rate environments, Alaska Airlines has had and will continue to buy new airlines and finance their growth through their own cash on hand. And in addition to this, given the increased capacity at their local airport of Seattle, they've also been focusing on infrastructure investments into their Portland and LAX airports of both 30% and 20% respectively. So to dive into some key catalysts of what's really going to make this stock move is first as the ESG transition. So first, I guess as a summary that I'll dive deeper into later in the presentation is that Alaska Airlines is essentially becoming a leader in the industry with their ESG initiatives, and this leads to cost synergies that are going to take them and further improve their margins beyond what they currently are. Second of which is the contract extensions. So back to what we mentioned about their values of their employees, they completed labor contracts with their pilots and their dispatchers, which allows them to have a first mover advantage over the remaining airlines in the industry, as other airlines may face labor disputes or labor strikes with their employees as they try to reach new agreements moving into the future. Last of which is the buyback program. We believe the buyback program is very important. Not only does it routinely return value to shareholders, it makes a statement that Alaska Airlines is going to be profitable moving into the future, able to generate enough cash to buy back shares for their employees. Or their customers, I apologize. So next is the ESG transition. So as I mentioned before, they completed their transition to a full 737 MAX fleet. We believe this is very important because not only does this help with fuel costs by saving 25% per plane, it also helps with fuel costs. Given fuel costs is such an incredibly high cost for the industry, this helps not only improve their carbon emissions, but also their bottom line. Next of which is the creation of Flyways. So what Flyways is Flyways is an AI-enabled software that helps dispatchers optimize optimize their flights. So in their trial period, they were able to shave off 2.5 minutes per optimized flight, which equates to 38,000 gallons of fuel per plane that this is used for. Last of which is the waste reduction. They completed the transition from plastic cups to paper cups, saving over 55 million cups per year. And they're the only airline in the industry to do so. So to dive deeper into the comparable companies analysis, of course there's a lot of numbers on the slide, but I guess if it could point your direction to the enterprise value over their earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, and rent. I chose to use this multiple because rent in particular is something that other companies will use to buy their aircraft and invest into their growth. So I believe this levels the playing field a bit. So with this, the last time we checked, Alaska Airlines was trading around $45 a share, which is at the very bottom of the industry in terms of this multiple. So this shows that they have incredible runway to continue with their cost synergies with their fleet transition, and with the upside of over $72 a share, which is what the best airline is trading at in the industry currently, or the most valuable multiple. And this extrapolates some of the multiples that I mentioned in the previous slide. First, to highlight the EBITDA margin. So with the EBITDA margin, they are well above the median in terms of this. And so the EBITDA margin shows that Alaska Airlines, before they completed their fleet transition, they are a cost leader in the industry. And this will only improve moving forward. Second of which is the debt to total capital ratio. In this case, Alaska Airlines is at the bottom of the industry in debt to total capital, meaning that not only are they able to finance their growth organically, they also don't have a lack of debt, which with rising interest rates and increased interest costs may depress their earnings in the future. And this also shows that Alaska Airlines may take on additional debt moving forward. Last of which is the return on invested capital. We believe this is incredibly important for investors into the company. Alaska Airlines is head and shoulders above anyone else in the industry with this return on invested capital, showing that they provide routine value to their shareholders, even in the current environment. So with our recommendation, I guess to recap, we have ESG leadership, cost initiatives, and attractive valuation. Essentially, in summary, Alaska Airlines is spearheading the industry with tangible impacts on their fleets, their transition with fuel costs, which helps lead to additional cost synergies for the company to help improve their bottom line in an industry where typically profitability is a bit tougher to come by. So with this and their attractive valuation, we believe that Alaska Airlines has tons of upside, especially with their ESG initiatives that they'll be able to build a sustainable future. And with this, we thank you. We open up for questions.
All right, judges, the floor is yours for 10 minutes of questions.
I would love to have you say a bit more about the electric aircraft projects and, whether how credible is one pilot, for an aircraft? Those are a couple things that you mentioned. Love to hear more about those.
Yeah, so I guess the preface, the reason that we included these in the industry is essentially we believe it's important to mention that the airline industry as a whole is transitioning to a more sustainable future. Of course, electric aircraft is definitely a very new project. Lots of startups are starting with it. So we think that the SAF fuel is something that should be paid attention to more now, given that Alaska Airlines has entered into a contract to buy, I believe, 185 million gallons starting in 2026. But of course, we just thought it would be worthy of mention to just include the electric aircraft, just because we think it's a creative invention that shows that people in the airline industry are cognizant of the sustainability issues.
Can you elaborate a little bit more about the carbon offset technology? And what is that?
So carbon offset technology, there's carbon sinks that airlines have. There's carbon sinks out there that they take their carbon and essentially put it into the sink. But there's only a limited source of carbon sinks. So essentially, the best way to describe it is they're trapping that carbon, putting it underground, which is kind of strange to think about. And also, there's only a limited source of carbon sinks. So with that, Alaska Airlines is putting that at the bottom of their 5-part plan, so that's kind of a last resort for them. They want to focus more on fleet renewal and new propulsion technology, utilizing that electric energy as well as water energy.
Yeah, and to add on to that, the hydrogen energy is a really big thing. It's already starting. It's a lot of major energy companies have also had the goal to start switching to that as well by 2050. They have the same goals as Alaska Airlines, and a lot of other airlines are trying there. But Alaska Airlines has been the first so far to actually put those plans into action by committing to. You want to finish that?
Yes, committing to those goals. As mentioned in the slide, 8 days ago from today, they hired new vice presidents. So those goals that we've mentioned, it's not just of the past time. It's not just in the few years to come. It's right now. They're working on this today.
Yeah, I can add on to that, just looking at the 2040 goal. I mean, a lot of it right now is their commitment for SAF with the amount of gallons that they're going to be purchasing. But back to the hydrogen, what percent did you see as far as what percent of the fuel by 2040 they're expecting to get to with hydrogen? Or I know they're trying to be a first mover in that.
I believe I did not see a percentage regarding their percentage of how much hydrogen they're working towards, because I think they're still creating a plan for this as they are the first in their industry to do this.
Yeah.
I guess to add a little bit onto that, I think that, obviously hydrogen energy in planes is something that's much newer of a technology. So with the SAF, obviously that's something that's much more attainable in the current term. I would say that for the hydrogen, even though we don't have any specific statistics on what percentage they're aiming for, I believe it's important to emphasize that Alaska Airlines has around a $6 billion market cap in comparison to something like Delta Airlines, which is 4 times larger. So given this, Alaska Airlines, we believe, is just much more adaptable to take on the hydrogen technology as well as the SAF fuels, because their fleet's a little bit smaller, and given that they don't have as much of their capital tied up in older planes as much as other companies might, it might be a little bit easier to transition moving forward.
And like Jagger said, if you went in that direction of adopting that technology, right now we're all, with Alaska Airlines, they're all operating on 737 MAXs, which allows for the SAF fuel to reduce costs and to have better fuel efficiency. So transitioning into that direction it's still in the development, but it's not as necessary as now.
And I wanted to add in that hydrogen technology is very expensive. So with that, they're needing to allocate a lot of funds towards this and understand the development behind this, and needing investors, funds to fund this program.
What's the biggest headwind you see Alaska Airlines facing? If I'm an investor and I'm trying to say, what should I fear in the future?
Yeah, so I would say that as with other airlines and other airlines as a whole, they certainly are agnostic to macroeconomic issues. So rising interest rates and so I guess it's some say that we might have a recession, others might argue against it. I guess in regards to the short-term look, I would say that like macroeconomic concerns, potentially lack of business travel if companies are looking to cut back on costs is something that we should be like paying attention to in the near term. I would say, however, though, I guess like with the sustainability goals and I guess like buying into an airline that's going to have a more sustainable future, I definitely think that like looking past this business cycle, I think that still having an investment into Alaska Airlines now, even in spite of like potential macroeconomic headwinds, is something that like we can also look to as well.
Yeah, and to add on to that, despite the possible macroeconomic impacts, and at the end of the day, Alaska Airlines will still be the airline. Like, people are still going to be flying, just maybe not as frequently, but they'll choose Alaska Airlines for their for how they are with their people and like how high their customer satisfaction rate is and the trust and loyalty they create with their customers. So they'd still be a good investment even then.
Also, to add in, there is a lot of like global tensions regarding the war in Ukraine, and regarding like possible like pandemics or future pandemics and things like that. So with that, Alaska Airlines, all of their flights are happening domestically, which is honestly more in their favor because of like global tensions happening in other places.
I'm going to get in trouble for asking this question, just so everybody knows. Alaska has put all of its eggs in the Boeing basket. What type of risk does that present should Boeing end up with some issues?
Yeah, so I certainly would say with the Boeing 737 MAX, it's obviously no secret that they've had troubles in the past. I believe in 2019 was a time where they had a couple issues with their technology. I definitely think that, of course, Boeing is certainly an idiosyncratic risk to the company. I definitely think that that's something that they might run into in the future. I do know that Boeing has taken many steps to make sure that their planes are up to regulation. So I would say even in that case, I definitely think that the technical issues is something that maybe Boeing can put behind them. I guess from the interest of both companies, I think that that was an issue in the past, but Boeing has put together several mitigants to help prevent that in the future.
And additionally, that was in the past. That's 3 years ago, or even more into the 4th year. And the United States has done the safety checks. You should have no risk flying on a Boeing aircraft into the future. The United States would not approve that. With the 2019 few crashes, Boeing has redesigned, government agencies have gone through the technology, it is safe up to standard, it's allowed to be flown.
I'll take the other side of that. What do you think are the benefits of being all Boeing?
So I guess I can touch on that a little bit with their fleet transition. So I would say, like I mentioned in one of the slides, the 25% fuel savings that they have per plane, I think that Boeing is certainly spearheading with their sustainability initiatives with their planes. I think that that's going to be a clear advantage over other companies that may be using the Airbuses. Alaska Airlines, for example, used to have Airbus as one of their main planes that they have, and they were incredibly inefficient. So I think that that's a clear advantage, I think, for the company, is just having not only the fuel cost savings, which is a huge cost for this industry, but also with the maintenance and pilot training costs. You don't have to train the pilots on how to fly an Airbus and a Boeing. You don't have to train the maintenance crew on how to fix either of them. So I definitely think you can see some savings there as well.
Well, if that is all the questions, let's have a round of applause for our team.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, can we all give a round of applause to our judges? Awesome. Okay, so here's what's going to happen, because you're not tired of listening to me yet. I'm going to go through a few quick slides, mostly really important thank yous. Then I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Shirok Sotogaran, who is going to announce our 4th place, 3rd place, 2nd place, and 1st place winners. And as that happens, we will pause between each place so that our photographer can take a picture of the teams at each place with their trophy. Does that make sense to everyone? Awesome. Okay, so first I want to start out, I really want to thank our Dean's Office, the Milgard School of Business Dean's Office. They threw in some extra funding to make sure that we could have a great in-person event. To be honest, as of last summer, we weren't sure if we were going to be able to go back to in-person. We were excited to. We wanted to see all your faces on something other than a flat two-dimensional screen. But we weren't quite sure, and it was really thanks to the Dean's Office that we were able to bring you all together in person and remember the vibrancy, the excitement, and the energy of bringing amazing students from across the world together with amazing judges from across our community and amazing volunteers from our UW-T community. So thank you to Dean Althoff Merchant for that. I want to thank our judges. I know you clapped for them as they came in. A couple of them had to head back to their day jobs, so they may not be here at this exact moment. But for the Group A mixer judges, Jolenta Coleman-Bush and Graham Evans. Graham, are you here? There you are. You can stand up and be clapped for. Bill Gaines and John Parrott. Woo, for Group B. Group C, Jeff Velu, is that correct? Velu. Thank you, Jeff Velu. And Ann Porter. And last but never least, Don King and Chris Rye. Our judges are very active in our community, in the Tacoma and South Sound community, so getting an entire day of their time is a really big deal, and we're really grateful to them for that. I also want to thank our mixer staff and volunteers. As you all know, it takes a village to make an event like this happen. We were really lucky to have a group of students who stepped forward and said, I want to be a table host, I want to help out putting folders together, I want to take things over to the Holiday Inn Express so everybody's, when they check in, has the info they need. So I'm not going to read all these names because at this point that feels a little tiny bit cruel, but I just want to thank all of our faculty and staff, both folks who took time out of their workday to be here today and those who volunteered. So if you're a Milgard faculty or UW-Tacoma faculty or staff member who helped out today, even as simple as helping us move a table, can you please stand up for a moment so we can acknowledge you? Thank you. I did not see Megan Bryant, who's been helping us out, stand up. So kudos to our program manager, Megan Bryant, who led an awesome field trip yesterday. Whoops. That didn't happen. Okay, it's okay. I'm all done. Kudos to Megan Bryant, and now I'm going to pass it on to Shirok Sadagaran.
Yeah, let me start by really a very big thank you, in addition to the thank yous we just did, a very big thank you to each of the students and the faculty advisors who invested so much time, effort, and energy in this activity. Clearly evident from all the presentations, no exceptions, all the presentations. Every year we say, the judges, who are all friends, and many of them have done this for years, they say every time they attend this event, they get recharged and have great hope for our future based on all of the presentations we see over here. So again, please give a big round of applause to all of the participants and the faculty advisors. I also want to add my thanks to the judges. These are all very, very, very busy individuals, but they give so generously of their time to come in. It's not just today, right? Because we send them the presentations when the students submit their presentations. We send that to the judges, and we actually give them homework before they arrive here today. So it's a lot more time investment than just today. So again, thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Don. Thank you, John. Thank you, Graham. And while Joe's sitting there, thank you, Joe, too. I've said this each year. You know, this is, if you enjoyed this event, if you enjoyed the experience, if you learned from it, then when you go back home, spread the word to your peers at your respective institutions, right? Because this is something, there are some schools that already have their own internal competitions to come to Milgard, right? So there are several schools here that have already been doing that for years. But again, for those of you who may be here for the first time, you know, if you had a good experience, then share that with your peers when you go back, with your faculty, so that, you know, others get a chance to experience this. Okay, so with that, the moment you've been waiting for, we'll go backwards over here. So again, I just want you to understand that the judges have a very tough job in this, even at the morning sessions, right? So keep that in mind as you assess your own performance and your own experience at this thing. But you know, we have to kind of end the event with the results. And so in fourth position was team D like David, D4, the University of Vermont. So please come up here and third position was team Alpha 1, which was the University of Florida.
Okay, here we go. Smiling, everyone. Here we go. One more. Thank you. Just a moment. Thanks.
In second position was team Charlie 1, Florida State University. So you've obviously figured out by now. And let me say, the Florida schools both did very well. They deserve it just for coming from 90 degrees weather to sub 30 degrees temperatures. So we appreciate that. And then one of the teams even had massive problems with their flights and so on. So again, congratulations, well done. And so that leaves us with the team that finished top in the 12th annual Milgard Invitational Case Competition on Social Responsibility. Team Bravo 3, the University of Calgary. set it there, whatever you want. Just on top. You're very welcome.
Okay, round of applause, please, everyone.
Now this you don't get to take, okay?
You wanted
You
to
can
take it on the
pose,
plane.
take as many pictures as you want. You just don't get to carry it home, so. Okay, so I think, unless there is anything else you want to do with this stuff, I think you're all probably ready to get out of your suits and enjoy the Friday evening. So again, thank you so much for coming, and we look forward to seeing your institutions back here again next year, and maybe some of you will come back for another round of this. So again, have a great evening and safe travels back home. Bye-bye.